Okay, now that we've applied some commands to our image, how can we now use history to step backwards in time and perhaps undo some of these effects? Well, it's actually really easy, as it turns out, thankfully. What we can do here is, if I want to get rid of the brightness contrast command and go back to angled strokes, all I need to do is just single click on angled strokes, and that removes the brightness contrast. Or I could go even further back in time by clicking on dry brush, and that takes me all the way back to how my image looked after I applied the dry brush effect, right? So the way that the history panel is organized here is we have the beginning of the timeline, if you will. I kind of think of it as a timeline anyway, at the top, and the ending of the timeline, or the current location on the timeline, if you will, at the bottom of the palette. So you know what I could do is I could use the history palette for a couple of neat techniques. For example, maybe I want to get sort of a before and after look at my image after I apply some color correction or after I apply some effects. So here I'm on brightness contrast again. I stepped forwards in time just by clicking on the last history state, as it's known. All of these blocks here are known as history states, or history steps, if you will. So I'm all the way forwards in time. And what I want to do is I want to do this sort of before and after comparison. So what I'll do is I'll click on the very first guy in the history palette, this guy here, barn1.jpg, and that takes me all the way back to how my image looked when I first opened it. This guy at the top here is what's referred to as a snapshot, kind of something that I want you to keep in the back of your mind just for a moment. So I click on the snapshot at the top of the history panel. This is how my barn looked when I first opened it. Then what I could do is I could click back on the last history state, or the last history step. Here's my after. So quite literally, before and after, just like that. And I go, I don't know if I like it or not, or maybe I should back up a couple of steps, you know, this sort of thing, right? So you can do a lot of cool things here. You can step forwards and backwards in time, one step at a time, by using keyboard shortcuts. So give this a try. On the Windows side, hold down Alt and Control. On the Mac side here, I'm going to hold down Option and Command, and then hit your Z key on your keyboard. And that will step you backwards in time. And you can see inside my history palette, the states are reverting back to the previous state, right? So again, Control and Alt on the Windows side, Command and Option here on the Mac. Now, if you want to step forwards in time using your keyboard, try this. On the Windows side, hold down Control and Shift. Here on the Mac, I'll hold down Command and Shift, and then hit the Z key on your keyboard. And that will allow you to step forwards in time. Okay, I've got to show you a couple of other neat things here. Let's say, for example, that I'm really happy with where things are looking here with the last state here, the brightness contrast. What I can do is I can save this position in my document. Let's say I'm working along on my image, maybe again applying some effects or some color correction, and I get to a point where I really like it, but I might still tinker a little bit with the image. Well, I can save the current state, if you will, of my image. I can save it as this thing called a snapshot. How do I do that? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to head up to the History Palette menu in the top right corner, and I'm simply going to choose New Snapshot. And I got a dialog box here, the New Snapshot dialog box. You can throw a name in there if you want. I'm just going to leave the default here, and I'll go ahead and click on OK. And then now at the top of the History Palette, we now have two snapshots. The first guy there, the default, Barn 1, and then Snapshot 1. So again, I can do this before and after comparison if I want, which is kind of cool. So there you go. You can always save your history states as snapshots, which is great. Now, a few other little tidbits that I want to bounce off you here related to history. I'm going to go all the way down to brightness contrast here, the very last history state. And then once again from the history menu, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop open the history palette menu, I should say. And then this time I'm going to choose new document. And what this will do is this will create a new Photoshop file based on the current history state that I have selected here inside the history palette. So once again, back to the history palette menu there. I went and got out of mine, and I'll choose new document. And now I have a new file inside Photoshop. There are no history states except this default one here, the duplicate state here. And it's a completely new file that I can continue working on if I want. And the original barn1.jpg is still open in the background. Just click on your document tab there. You can see all the history states are there inside the history palette, all intact, which is awesome. I hope you're enjoying this. I hope you're really going to use history a lot. I use history a whole heck of a lot because I'm always making mistakes. Anyway, I hope this is all good for you here. I want to bounce one more thing off of you. He's kind of related to the issue of undoing, and he's kind of related to history as well. He's called reverting, and I'll show you that really quickly in the next exercise.